Hello and welcome to this edition of Exclusive Interview, coming to you from the studios of 84 TV Radio Abuja. My name is Stanley Bentu. Today we beam our searchlight on the Tertiary Education Fund, that is TETFUND, if you like, and we'll be looking at the reasons why this institution was set up, as well as some of the challenges that it's been facing over the years. But first of all, let us find out why it was set up and whether or not it has lived up to its responsibilities. Have a look at this.
The Tertiary Education Trust Fund was originally established in 1993, but received its current name in 2011. TETFUND is an agency set up to provide supplementary support to all levels of public tertiary institutions for the rehabilitation, restoration and consolidation of tertiary education in Nigeria. Its main source of income is the 2% education tax paid from the profit of companies in Nigeria. The Federal Inland Revenue Services assesses and collects the tax on behalf of the fund, who disburses them for the general improvement of education in public tertiary institutions. To what extent have the disbursement of these funds been effectively utilized by these institutions? On Exclusive Interview today, we speak to the Executive Secretary of TETFUND, Professor SULEIMAN ELIAS BOGORO. He is an agriculturist, administrator and innovator who is often referred to as the Apostle of Research and Development.
Joining me on this edition of Exclusive Interview is SULEIMAN BOGORO. He's a professor, a researcher, a consultant, and the Executive Secretary of the Tertiary Education Trust Fund, or TETFUND, as it is also known. Now, he's a man with a passion for research and development, otherwise known as R&D. Professor, you are very much welcome to this program.
Thank you so much.
Now, we'll just go straight into it. You were the Executive Secretary of TETFUND from 2014 to 2016. You left in January 2019, but you were reinstated. Could you give us a recap of what went on during the 2014 to 2016 tenure, beaming a searchlight on the allegations of missing funds?
Right, that was more of the defining line of the baseless allegations against me. There were 5 allegations based on what the Senate, the Ed Senate, communicated to me at that time. And of the 5, the most striking, invariably, was the so-called missing 200 billion naira that those that sponsored, wrote, or funded, whichever way you want to call it, the allegations wanted Nigerians to believe. When right inside me, I knew, because of the fact that we're talking about 200 billion naira, it overshadowed the other allegations, including, for instance, the fact that we spent 500 million on publicity of TETFUND activities in 1 year and all that. But the 200 billion, yes, nobody will overlook if they told you that 200 billion naira was missing from the coffers of an intervention agency, a trust fund in the education sector, a sector that badly needs money. It would be reckless for anybody to carelessly take away 200. And for me, when I was invited, it was a high-profile allegation because it was laid on the floor of the Senate on the day that the Senate is sitting live. So friends all over the world called me and said, "What are we hearing?" I told them, calm down. They refused to believe it until when eventually I appeared before the Senate. And I was now to formally defend those allegations. Of course, the protocol requires that you respond. If there are allegations against you, and head of a public agency or whichever, as it were, you respond before you come to face them in plenary, well, the committee in plenary, before media. And when I came, of course, they had read my response. So a lot of tension had been doused, I can assure you. because it was very clear that all the 5 allegations were baseless, particularly the 200. One, there was never 200 billion missing in TETFUND. A figure of 273.9 billion was contentiously a central investigation matter. But the facts were very clear to me as the executive secretary then. I knew the facts were clear. I came and met that 273.9 billion, taken about 6 months, between 6 to 9 months before I became ES. So I had nothing to do with it. But here they were, the allegation were that I was the one that took the money.
But you were able to clear yourself.
Well,
of that.
thank God we did, because it was very easy. Like I said, that money was taken out. That money was taken out from higher authorities to settle the ASU. To settle ASU agreement of 2013, and I was appointed 2014. I had written earlier asking for refund of that money, and so it was ridiculous for somebody to suggest. When I wrote and I said somebody somewhere our money was taken away, then I just read somewhere they're saying I was the thief. So it was as bad as that. But thank God, by the time we finished the public hearing, all the senators picked their microphone and said we were misled. And I can assure you there were other investigations, because it's very sensitive matter. There were other investigations after I was disengaged, February 2016. I requested that I don't mind if there is investigation. And Mr. President was so kind to proceed with that. And at the end of the day,
I guess all is well that ends well, and you have been reinstated.
Yes.
And you are facing new challenges today. So the tertiary education in Nigeria, it's faced lots of challenges. And some of those challenges include inadequacy of infrastructure, critical manpower, and it also includes funding for research. And opinions show that a lot of progress has been made there, but still there are some lapses. So how does TETFUND plan to a large extent, contain and overturn some of these lapses?
You know better what you mean by lapses. You've not explained yet. Let me hear you.
Well, perhaps the challenges.
Yeah, rather than lapses, because if there are challenges,
they meet up to the magnitude.
If there are challenges, are not exactly lapses. Let me make this very clear.
Okay.
The challenges are not lapses, because lapses, it amounts to suggesting that some things have been done improperly within the organization TETFUND, because we preside over public funds for the purpose of intervention in public tertiary institutions, and our law defines them: universities owned by federal, state governments, polytechnics owned by the same 2 levels of government, and colleges of education. So how do you plan to tackle some of these challenges, which are huge? Good. Well, definitely that's why we are there in the first place. And knowing the history of the emergence of TETFUND today, don't forget that until 2011, it was ETF, Education Trust Fund. But that wasn't the original concept. It was supposed to be Trust Fund, TETFUND, Tertiary Education Trust Fund, ab initio. But the military government in 1993 decided to call it Education Tax Fund, and later in 1998 amended the law to be Trust Fund. And by 2011, when it was discovered that the impact was not anything to celebrate, a case was made for going back to the original idea, and that is that it should be for public tertiary institutions. There was no basis for applying the funds of ETF to include basic subsector, which is being funded by law by UBEC, with 2% consolidated funds of the Federation going for it, and the other details, of course, you know. And it will be noticed that from 2011, when there was a refocus to the original concept of funding public tertiary institutions, you saw infrastructure, because that was the basis actually for even the demand for a non-budgetary independent funding window for tertiary education. It was for infrastructure. And anybody that has seen our institutions today at TETFUND, we are happy to say we're proud of something. There is the joke that most public tertiary institutions can as well be renamed TETFUND, universities, polytechnics, and colleges. To me, there is no better way to say our impact is manifest. And beyond the physical infrastructure that anybody passing by the roadside would see. Now, on my return last year, we decided to say, hey, we have had significant emergence of physical infrastructure. But the rating and ranking of universities, for instance, globally, is more on the content components. And what are the content components? The quality of the personnel, the quality of research, the level of innovation, creativity in products of research, as it were.
Interestingly, you constituted an 11-man committee to look into this. And this is the next question I would like to ask you. So please don't go away, because when we come back, we'll be looking at research and development and some of the new innovations that Professor Bogoro has brought into TETFUND. Don't go away. Join us again.
Developed civilized nations don't joke with research. Billions of dollars are annually spent on research, And of course, what we need to do in this country is what we have been doing at some levels, through intervention funds like TETFUND, like UBEC, but of course, these are still a drop in the ocean. The ocean of knowledge is very deep, it should be better funded. We're not saying that government has not done this, but government is trying. But the argument here is that we need more funding.
Without research, you wouldn't have data. And data would quantify to give us number of people we are planning for. Let's take, for instance, a community of about 200,000. And you know that 200,000 need a number of, let's say, barrels of water for a period of time. And so if you know that there are 200,000, and another 10 years you haven't conducted another interview or another research to be able to identify the number that you're planning for, it will be a failure.
Research will help the nation to bridge the gap between where we are now and where we ought to be. In a nation like Nigeria, you have so many fields. Definitely, you don't have resources for all these fields. You must find out what is your advantage. That is area you put resources. It is painful that today in this nation, so many research products are wasted. Because the government of the day, even for the decades, they don't show interest in what comes out. And those things end up in the research tables and the shelves.
AD4 TV Radio, with focus on education with emphasis on research and innovation, science and technology, women and girl-child education, children, health, youth and sports, socio-political and economic reforms, security, environment, entrepreneurship, and entertainment. Will give you information at your fingertips. Learn on the go. Follow AD4 TV Radio on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, and YouTube. AD4 TV Radio, reliable and credible.
We love you, AD4 TV Radio.
Welcome back to Exclusive Interview, and we've been spending time with the Executive Secretary of TETFUND, Professor SULEIMAN Bogoro. And we've been looking at some of the innovations and some of the developments that have been introduced into TETFUND. Infrastructure has been a major problem, but research and development is the new direction. And this is where I want to focus. And Professor, I want to share a story with you. When I was an undergraduate and I studied industrial design, I went to work as an intern, and I was introduced into new ways of doing things. And this was at the dawn of the internet. And so when I returned to school, I applied some of the computer applications that I had learned in the course of my holiday. But my lecturers didn't like it. And so my lecturers didn't like it.
Oh, wow.
It was a new innovation. But here is how the story turned out. I suffered for that. But within 3 years of my graduation, computers took over design. And what I was trying to introduce has now become the norm in the industry today.
Correct.
So in May 2019, you constituted an 11-man committee, an impact assessment committee with a mandate to deepen research culture in universities. So right now we have lots of graduates who are coming out of the universities. How do we make them more relevant to the industry?
Thank you very much. Incidentally, TETFUND supports entrepreneurship through curricular content as well as skills acquisition associated with it. And I can assure you that, like I told you, for a long time, we were supporting mainly infrastructure. But over time now, about 10 years, TETFUND has gone into supporting the content components. And research is virtually the very first one can refer to. And we are looking at the products of coming out with bachelor's degree from our universities, polytechnics, colleges of education, as it were, as well as the capacity of even the lecturers that teach them or mentor them. And we've discovered a huge gap that over time, for instance, our universities are overstressed teaching at the expense of research. And that is anomalous. So as it is, decided, let's do it right. If you get it right with research, it is research that improves teaching, pedagogy. Pedagogy skills are improved through research, and not the other way around. And it is very obvious, therefore, that you benefit more from emphasizing research than doing the reverse of emphasizing teaching, while research suffers. And for too long, let me say this, at all levels, the 3 levels of bachelor degree, master's, and PhD, the emphasis for research work, projects, theses, and dissertations have been around theoretical matters, not necessarily problem solving. Not problem solving or needs tailored research, as it were. And we always say it, sometimes we say client-driven research. All these imply the same thing. For too long.
How does TETFUND intend to change this culture?
Yeah.
Are you engaging companies?
Well, that is one of it. First and foremost, our law is very clear. We have to relate with the regulatory agencies. We cannot, as TETFUND, because we are managing funds, we will not be leading, but we are supporting the regulatory agencies for universities and UC, for polytechnics and BTE, and for colleges of education and CCE, supporting them to intervene in the priority areas that will change this narrative. And that is why you would notice for quite a while, we've been working closely with these 3 regulatory agencies, and it's beginning to yield results, because even the publicity about deepening research, that I call it.
So I'd like to know what sort of impact it's made so far.
Yeah, but talking about, I started the idea of institutionalization of R&D, that's what I called it, in 2014, when I came on board first time, for about 2 years.
That's your national R&D fund?
Yeah, ultimately, yes, we are actually preempting the obvious.
Explain to me
National
what
R&D,
that is all about.
National R&D Foundation.
How that works and how much it will impact.
Oh, yeah. In fact, you talked about an 11-member committee that I inaugurated in May last year. Yes, that was more of a sensitization committee, and they just gave an interim report. Fantastic. In fact, it's going to constitute the foundation for proceeding to the next stage. We're hoping to inaugurate a TETFUND R&D standing committee. And that standing committee is supposed to take up from where desensitization committee stopped. And ultimately, the ultimate goal is for Nigeria to have a national R&D foundation. That is the concept. And if that happens, as it were now, at the moment, TETFUND has about the largest single research grant visible in Nigeria. And it used to be initially 3 billion plus one more 4 billion. But last year, Mr. President was gracious enough to approve 5 billion for a single year. And that has changed the narrative. In fact, out there in the tertiary institutions, they are celebrating that the money has jumped. Remarkably. And there is increased response, increased awareness. In 2016, when call for proposal were put up, only 1,800 applied. Last year, when we put up concept note, because we now change it, instead of full grant, inviting full grants, we invited concept notes. And after screening them, those that qualify to write the full grants are now invited to write, as it were, with up to a limit of up to 50 million per research grant for the National Research Fund. So we're hoping that if at the end of the day, this committee makes a case, and because we're inviting in industry, this is the first time now, even at the Economic Summit group meeting in October last year, for the first time, there was a platform for the academia and industry seated together. And again, another thing that happened that time also, the Minister of State for Education was seated as a co-chair with the Minister of State for Science and Tech. And they chaired the plenary group, or discussion session, where about 4 of us, the Executive Secretary of NUC, Professor Bakar Rashid, myself, and 2 from diaspora, they presided over a discussion on deepening the partnership between academia and industry. That has been a missing link. We've been operating in isolation.
And I want to see how you want to extend it even to the teaching staff, because we've had this culture of professors going on sabbatical leaves, or even lecturers. And basically what they do is go to other institutions.
Correct.
And they teach.
Correct.
But I gather that your innovation is to have these lecturers perhaps visit our industry.
More of them going to the industry.
So that they understand what the local needs are.
Thank you very much.
In order to boost productivity.
You got it right. You got it right. I can't wait to have that happen. I can't wait to have that happen. And believe me, that is the only way to go. For too long, when I said we've emphasized teaching at the expense of research, even in respect of research, research, like I said, has been tailored more around the theoretical, understanding the theories, rather than addressing specific local, regional, national, and international problems, or continental problem, international problem. And we are saying, no, our research must be needs-based. It must be problem-solving targeted. And let's look at the issues that you go to the Ivy League universities in the world. There are clusters of industries related to the disciplines that they offer in those universities, because their research targets solving problems. And it's easy for industries to naturally spring. We're still far away from that in our country.
And that's a gap you would like.
It is a major gap.
All right. We have a very short time remaining,
Yes.
but I would just like you to speak very quickly. I understand you have a patent, and this is for the, you called it the Rumen Foundation model, which is basically a technique for better understanding and tooling of rumen metabolism.
Yeah.
You studied agriculture.
I did.
In about 30 seconds, can you explain to us what that patent is? Because I found it very interesting indeed. We need innovation.
Yeah, well, it's a model, and the patent is still being developed. Yeah, the patent is still being developed. We hope that it eventually scales through. But it's a model that was developed from my PhD research. And we've applied it and undertaken some publications in credible journals in respect of that particular fermentation model. We call it rumen fermentation model. And what
do you hope that will achieve?
Yeah, it's very simple. All we want to achieve is to the rumen fermentation. The rumen is biological science, you knew it in those days. We talk about some animal with 4 stomachs. And the chambers they have 4 chambers of the stomach. That is correct. Cattle, buffaloes, call it sheep, goats, and so on. The rumen is the largest component, and its fermentation. The environment is anaerobic, essentially, and it's that aspect that we looked at the metabolites. In other words, the breakdown, the biochemical breakdown products, as we call the metabolites, from them. And put a number of factors, including, of course, the pH, the osmotic pressure in the system, and so on and so forth. So we defined it in that particular model in a way that if you understood what they were consuming, the grass, the proteins that went with it, you are able to understand the proportions of those materials. You analyze them. You develop a statistical correlation with those feed stuffs. That gives you a leeway to be able to predict what is desirable, and you can extend it depending on the analytical content, the chemical analytical content of those other materials that you are feeding to ruminant animals. Yeah, well, I mean, there may be, but yes, it makes it easy.
Right now.
I know it would be.
But
for you.
Professor, I am sure that once this comes on board, Nigerian agriculture will be the better for it. Sure. And I wish you good luck on all of your endeavors at TETFUND, and we will follow your tenure and analyze a lot of the successes that we expect that you would have. So we just want to say thank you so much for taking the time to come here and speak with us.
Great pleasure. I'm happy to be here first time.
Well, we've been talking to the Executive Secretary of TETFUND, that is Professor SULEIMAN BOGORO, and he said so many things, some of which I want to lay out to you as critical steps that we need to take if we want to improve tertiary education in Nigeria. Well, first of all, he talked about the content component. Now, so far, TETFUND has been intervening on the construction of buildings and some of the infrastructure deficits that we have in this country. But Professor Bogoro believes that if we invest more in research and development, then we can lift our education standards to quite another level. Well, he talked about expanding the capacity of lecturers as a second step that we need to take. If we can create better lecturers, ultimately they will create better students for us. Well, we need to have research that improves teaching, and that is very important. Step number 3. We have to have a research and development foundation. And this foundation is one that would create and establish and also build the culture of research and development in Nigeria so that we can have graduates that are problem solvers rather than graduates that simply need jobs and salaries at the end of the day. Increased funding is something that goes without saying. The government needs to put in a little bit more money to make sure that we have enough support to have research and development that can come up with solutions to some of the critical problems that we're facing in this country. Now, according to Professor Bogoro, we have to have some kind of synergy between the industries and the academia so that the industries can send a signal to the academia as to exactly what kind of graduates that they expect to employ in the future. And the academia can now plan and project and train these graduates so that they can fit in very easily into the industries that we have within the country. And finally, perhaps a good way to bring closer the industries and the academia is to send our lecturers on sabbatical leave instead of to other universities. We can send them to the industries so that they can learn what the current trends are and come back with new knowledge that they can impart to our young Nigerians who are out there aspiring to have a great future within our industries. And I think if we can do that, then we can look forward to a much brighter future. Well, that's it on Exclusive Interview today. From my team, we would like to say thank you very much, and tune in again next time when we'll come to you with another exciting edition of Exclusive Interview from 84 TV Radio. I would like to say have a very good evening.